My name is David Patano. I'm a clinical music therapist in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm happy to be with you to be sharing information about the purposeful use of music from pregnancy through infancy. And included in the middle there, I'm going to be talking about that middle stage of how we can utilize music in a purposeful way for the labor and delivery process. But before we get started, I'd like to just share some information with you. First, I'd like to mention that on the websites, there's some PDF selections there that go along with the information today. And there's 3 pieces that if you want to open up on your computer screen and have off to the side while you're viewing this, or you can print them off. The 3 being the outline of the information, and I've left blank areas that you can fill in some blanks as we're going along. The second piece is a 14-point music research sheet that I'll be referring to in the information. And the third piece is a sheet that has information about the goals and objectives of the information. Before we get into the body of the presentation, which is how we can thoughtfully use music and mother's voice during pregnancy, labor and delivery, and even infancy and toddlerhood, I'd like to have us understand how and why music affects us the way it does, and then we can know how to thoughtfully use it. And I'd like to do that by looking at the music therapy research. But before we do that, there's 2 things I'd like to mention. First, the definition of music therapy, which is, I like the definition being, music therapy is using music for non-musical goals. In other words, when we're utilizing music, let's say for labor and delivery, the goal is not to entertain ourselves or entertain our husband or partner or the doctor and the nurses in the room if you're using a boombox. The goal is, let's say labor and delivery, that we want to utilize music to have a rhythmic guide for the different stages of breathing, or we want to utilize music for a positive diversion from the stressful exertion, or positive diversion from pain. Clinical goals. That's what music therapy is. If we are entertained, that's icing on the cake. The other thing I'd just like to mention too, and I'll be saying this many times through the information, is that 2 key areas of why music benefit us when we choose to use it. And the first being preferred music, when we choose the music. That's probably the biggest thing I could stress here when we're trying to use music for our benefit, particularly with clinical goals, that we choose the music. And the second thing is that once we choose music we want to utilize, then listen to it enough that we can develop a conditioned response. Let me briefly talk about that term I used, conditioned response, because I will be mentioning it throughout the presentation. What a conditioned response is when we get a physical feeling or an emotion from a stimulus that we have no control over. And maybe we've heard that term, if you can remember from school biology or science class, you've heard maybe the reference to Pavlov's dogs. The scientist Pavlov when he would feed his dogs, he would always ring a bell. And after doing that over time, he saw that without any food, when he rang the bell, the dogs would salivate. So that's a conditioned response. And that's how we want to build up the use of music, so we can have these responses, but doing it in a thoughtful, positive way, so we can control the responses that we want, such as decreased stress, or having music we listen to be a positive diversion from pain, or have a song instantly take us back to a time and a place that's pleasant, so we can again experience diversion from whatever stress or pain. So I did want to mention that's what a conditioned response is. Now it's time to start with our outline information. I'm going to be starting with number 1A. It says research handout discussion. The first bit of research I'd like to start with is number 4, which says music has been clinically proven to decrease the perception of physical and emotional pain. In discussing this, I just first want to mention how pain functions physiologically. And for us to feel pain, neural pathways have to connect through our body to our brain for us to perceive pain. For instance, if I bang my shin on a step going up the stairs, for me to feel that pain, neural pathways, which are microscopic nerve endings all through our body, neural pathways have to connect all through our body like little extension cords to our spinal cord, to our brain, and then we feel pain. So that's how that works. And with regard to music, there's a couple areas that are talked about. One being that the area I just mentioned about neural pathways. And when we perceive anything, whether it's pain or in this case, let's say music, when we perceive either, we have to utilize many neural pathways to perceive that experience. An example I use is this. If we're on our couch with an awful splitting headache and someone comes knocks on our front door and says, "Oh my goodness, a youngster on a bike was just hit by a car out in front of our house." Well, at that time with our awful splitting headache, we would get up off the couch and there we go out there with the youngsters, shaken up, and maybe there's paramedics and neighbors, people around, a lot of commotion. Probably at that time we would not perceive the pain in our head anymore. Why? Because we are attending to the task at hand, utilizing many neural pathways to perceive that task, leaving less to perceive pain. And that's what we're trying to do. So when we utilize music, let's say for pain management, in this regard, with talking about neural pathways, if we really have built up response, positive emotional experience to music, positive associations, then when we have pain and we put that music on, to perceive that music and really attend to it, we have to utilize many neural pathways, leaving less neural pathways to perceive pain. And another area we just talk about, and a PhD music therapist, Helen Bonney, talks about this, is that also, again, when we choose music and attend to it and are experiencing it, our body does create and produce our body's natural opiates, which are like natural painkillers. Let me just talk about number 3, and that is music has been clinically proven to increase the positive effects of medications. A lot like with the pain, let's talk about how medication benefit functions. For medication, in most cases, to benefit us, particularly oral medication, it has to stay in our system, stay in our gut longer. When we are anxious and our physiology is revved up, when we're really kind of moving along, things do move through us quicker. And what we want to do to optimize medication benefits is we want to induce a relaxation response so everything can slow down. If you look at numbers 5 and 6, you see those are more stress-related research areas, but it talks about decreasing heart rate, respiration rate, decreasing brainwave activity. When our bodies slow down under a relaxation response, then with regard to medications, then medication can stay in our gut longer, optimizing absorption. Let me just say, then, as the medication can be more readily absorbed, it helps the medication be more effective, and in many cases then helping us need less medication for the benefit that we're looking for. And with regard to childbirth and pain, I'd like to cite some research by a PhD music therapist in Boston named Susan Hanser. I'll just read a paragraph here. It says, "The area of childbirth has produced probably the most dramatic results with regard to music's effect on pain. Hanser emphasized the autoanalgesic effect of music to decrease pain through cued rhythmic breathing. Here, she helped the women relax by prompting positive associations with music, and results were that 100% of the experimental mothers experienced less pain while music was playing during labor." In surgery settings and in birth centers, most often it is people who are interested in music, and that kind of gets to my point that when we choose music, then we invest in it, and then we can really experience the benefits. Number 11 talks about how music has been clinically proven to be an effective helper during exercise or fitness times by acting as a motivator, positive diversion, and timekeeper or pace setter. Now that's talking about exercise, but let me just talk about another piece of research I'll mention briefly with regard to exertion and stress perception. The title of this article is "The Influence of Preferred Music on the Perceived Exertion, Mood, and Time Estimation Scores of Patients Participating in a Cardiac Rehab Exercise Program." Now, let's take that to what we're talking about with labor and delivery. There is stress involved, there's perceived exertion, and there's time involved. So it's not unlike an exercise routine that this article specifically talks about. But let me just read the little short sentence about the results. It says, results from this research suggest that preferred music listening may decrease perceived exertion, increase positive mood, and decrease estimations of time duration for some subjects. Now, when they say some, I'm guessing that they used people across the board. Some people didn't like music, some people liked it a little bit, some people loved it. But I would say individuals like yourselves who are choosing to use it, who love music, most likely those benefits would happen most often. Not just for some, but most often. Because, again, you're choosing to do it, and you're going to be more invested than someone who, says music maybe isn't their cup of tea so much. So that's some of the music research, and let me just go on in the outline. Now we're on to section B, music and stress. Number 1, here it is. I've been saying it right along as I mentioned I would. That 2 important keys to increase the benefits of music. They are preferred music, we've said that, and B, building up a conditioned response. So then, and I'm going to be talking more about that again as we go on. Number 2, this is B number 2, primary cognitive experience. If you'd like to write the definition down, I'll say it. The definition is that we cannot control the feelings and emotions music gives us. That's what a primary cognitive experience is. But more specifically, we experience that when we have reactions to sensory experiences. Sensory being sight, sound, touch, taste, and hearing. When we have any of those sensory experiences, we cannot control the feelings and emotions that come about. And music, of course, being hearing, that is the case with music. An example I use here is that if you're in a mall, let's say, and a fragrance goes by your nose, and that fragrance reminds you of your grandmother, let's say, whether you want to think of your grandmother or not, you cannot help it. You will think of your grandmother. And music does the same thing, good and bad. As a music therapist, I need to be really careful that I don't play music that somebody has an awful association with. So in our case, why we say preferred music is because we want to build up that positive, beneficial conditioned response. Now in our outline, we're going to go to number 1, letter B, number 3, music's temporal aspect. I'd first like to define this for us. And music's temporal aspect means that music happens in time. What I mean by that is, if I'm engaging in a music experience that's 5 minutes long, whether it's singing a song or listening or playing an instrument, and if I am focusing on it and engaging in this music, I know that that's 5 minutes that I will not be focusing on other things. That's what we mean by music happening in time. A nice example came to mind today. I was working with a hospice patient, an elderly woman with dementia, and she's someone who just really lights up when we engage in music. And today, though, for the first time that I remember, she mentioned a painful wrist she had, and from what she could recall, she fell. I didn't really see swelling or much bruising, but you could just tell when she moved it was very painful for her. So after we talked about that and some other things, we started our routine of enjoying music that I know that she loves. And she's someone who sings. And after the second song, she said, I had this thought that when I sing, I don't really feel the pain in my wrist anymore. And we discussed that, and as we sang more, we did that, consciously. We were thinking about, singing and utilizing that music for that positive diversion, for the length of time that music was. But that was a nice example of how music happens in time and how we can focus on music, diverting us from other stressors. For our purposes today, let's even use an example where, let's say we put together a playlist or a CD that's 45 minutes long with our favorite slow music for the early part of labor. And we've chosen the music, we know we love this music, So we put the music on, and when and if we can engage in that music, and that's 45 minutes that we will not be focusing on other things, maybe about the upcoming hours and our impending birth of our child, or nervousness about things, or even mild pain you're having in the early part of labor, or other things. So that's 45 minutes then. We can be away from those stressors and thoughts, focusing on the music. And that's what we mean by music's temporal aspect, that music happens in time. That's the end of our first section. We're going to go on to the purposeful use of music and voice during pregnancy. Now we're on to number 2, the purposeful use of music and voice during pregnancy. Notice I said and voice. Not that I'm going to make you or encourage you that you have to sing. Most people aren't vocalists, but you'll see what I'm getting at as we move on in this short section. Related to this, and particularly the use of voice, I want to talk about a famous ears, nose, and throat doctor from France. His name is Alfred Tomatis, and he did the bulk of his work in the 50s and 60s. Now, relative to our discussion, his work and research found, I'm just going to read these, so if you'll excuse me for reading here, that 3 areas. That number 1, his work found that a developing fetus is able to hear 65% of sound outside the womb. And prior to this, science and doctors thought that the womb was like this sanctuary where impenetrable of sound and everything else, that the developing child was away from all sound and most stimulation. But Tomatis found through his research that a child can hear 65% of sound outside the womb. So if this clapping sound is 100%, 65% might be this. So they very, very much are able to experience sound, and not to mention emotion and chemical reactions that the mother has, but we're talking about sound here. And let me just tell, I think, an interesting, fun story. In my music therapy studies years ago, I saw this piece where this musician, she was a cellist in the San Francisco Orchestra, and she was talking about how 20 years previously, she had been working on this solo piece. She was a soloist in the symphony, and she worked for months and months on this piece while she was pregnant. And cello, the instrument is kind of like a guitar. It's up against your body in a significant way. And she talked about how for months and months she was practicing this one solo piece, and years later, 20 years later, she had an adult son come up to her and say, "Mom, I just have to ask you, I heard this piece today and it's like haunting me." And he kind of described it and hummed it or whatever he did to describe it to his mom, and his mom thought and then realized that was the piece that she was rehearsing for months while he was pregnant, and he had just heard that, and it was still with him. Sound, but anything emotional, gets indulled in our DNA. That's why, for instance, as an example, Vietnam veterans, let's say, why 40 years later might they still be having flashbacks? Well, anytime we're a part of something physical and emotional, it gets indulled in our system. So that's how those kinds of things work. So positive music experiences fall under that category. And where I'm moving to is how we can utilize music during pregnancy. So let me just talk more about 2 more points about Tomatis' work. Number 2, Tomatis found how to duplicate the sound or frequency range that a baby experiences in the womb. And it's kind of a long, intricate story about how and why Tomatis even went down this road of work with developing children and how much the fetus hears and those kinds of things. But through his work, and he ended up doing a lot of work with autistic children and people with emotional disorders. one of the hallmarks of his work, besides his research findings, is his development of something he used in many areas of his work, and it's called the electronic ear, which is a headphone apparatus that filters out sound. And when Tomatis and Tomatis clinicians use the electronic ear, it is to either have the person listening to it, the child, let's say, listening to it, experience mother's voice, or most likely Mozart music specifically. Not most classical music, but specifically Mozart, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But through his research, he found out that within the womb, the child hears sound that is devoid of most mid but low frequency. So it's a really high-pitched, scratchy sound. If you can think about how you might, on your stereo, turn the bass and the mid-range off and just turn the treble all the way up, that's kind of approaching it, but it's a real scratchy, high sound. And when he developed, when he was able to pump that in these headphones, and let's say having a child listen to his mother reading a story, but it sounds like it does in the womb, in all cases, the children, and I've seen this before, that they put the headphones on, mom's voice reading a story is coming through, but the frequencies are such that it's the same experience they had in the womb. The children curl up in a fetal position. So that's just very interesting. So Tomatis was able to find that out, and I'm getting towards talking about how we can utilize these research ideas of Tomatis. And the last area I want to talk about his work is that how specifically important mother's voice is to the baby, and I just kind of touched on that, where he would utilize mother's voice reading a story, or Mozart music. Why Mozart? Well, he researched all the world's music, and he found that two music styles particularly are a benefit to all people around the world, across the board. And those two styles are Mozart, which I mentioned, but the other style is Gregorian chant. Gregorian chant are the monks who chanted sacred music with no instruments, but just voice. And when he saw that it had such a wide appeal, he started looking into, well, why is Mozart music, specifically in Gregorian chant, universally accepted more than other styles? He found that Mozart, probably because he had a wonderful womb experience himself, he was a prodigy and was writing significant orchestral works when he was 4 years old, so he probably had development experience unlike other people. He was unbelievably gifted, of course, that he just instinctively arranged for the orchestra with instruments that are of the frequency range that humans have the most frequency receptors to. In Gregorian chant, the same tonal or the same frequency range. Also, in our listening mechanism, we have receptors that receive certain frequencies, and the most frequencies that we have are in that range that Mozart arranges his orchestra for, using that instrumentation with those frequencies more than other composers, but specifically Gregorian chant, as I mentioned. So that's why mother's voice, Gregorian chant, and Mozart music are what Tomatis has used in his work to benefit particularly young people developing. So let's get to next area on the outline here. How can we use music and voice during pregnancy? Okay, what can we do with this information? And it's nothing intricate at all, but first I just want to refer to at the top, number 1, letter B, 1, that just gets back to using preferred music and building that conditioned response. I'm saying it again. So preferred music during pregnancy that you just listen to and have those positive emotional experiences with. What you don't want to do, if possible, is experience a lot of stress. Of course, we all know that. But music is something we can go out of our way to purposefully experience positive emotional experiences. Again, why? Because we're choosing the music and we're choosing to do it. Number 2, this is going to tie down to the very bottom about using music for infancy, but we'll talk about that later. But number 2 says Add to number 1, using music in a regimented manner. That is, certain types of music at specific times of day when you're pregnant. And a great thing to do, and I'll go down to number 4, is maybe with headphones. And you've probably heard of people doing this, or maybe you've even done this with, with previous pregnancies, or read about this. But it's a wonderful thing to get some headphones that you can just kind of open up and put on your belly. And a great thing to do, Mozart music, or just even your favorite music that you have positive associations with. Because remember, you're passing on your chemical reactions. Is it going to be stressful or non-stressful? Non-beneficial or beneficial to your child. So put on music that you love. Put headphones on your belly of music you love. But you can even do Mozart, Gregorian chant also. Another thing to do, and this is what I was getting at when we were talking about what can we do to use our voice. Again, we're not going to be singers. We don't have to be. Although if you are and you can sing, that's a wonderful thing too. But a thing you want to do is, as your child is developing, moms, I'm talking to moms here, is read stories that you're going to be reading to your child once the child is born. Pick those books out in a preliminary way before you deliver. And for months and months, read those books. Identify 2, 3, 4, 10 books that you're going to read at bedtime. Read not instructional books, but books that you might read before lunch. Just different times. But the key thing is that your developing baby can experience your voice. Not only, remember, 65% of sound, but also your bone conduction transfers sound to your developing baby also. So read books, and read books that you're going to be reading after. Don't, you're kind of wasting an opportunity if you choose books when you're pregnant, then use different books when they're born. Use the same books and think about that and be thoughtful about that. And as I just mentioned, number 4 says with headphones, do that. It's a wonderful way for your child to experience music. But also too, like I said with the books, think about music that you're going to use when the child is born. Think about music you could see yourself using every night at bedtime. And before you go to bed, play that music. Music for fun times. When you're in an energetic space, put that music on and experience. Mom, as exercise movement. Your baby experiences all those physical and emotional and chemical reactions you have to those positive experiences. So do things when you're pregnant that you're going to do once the baby is born. Again, you're building up those conditioned responses. And then now we're really getting into what I said earlier. We're building up those conditioned responses from choosing music and experiences that we outline ourselves. And the next section we're going to go to, the purposeful use of music and voice during labor. Now we're going to talk about number 3, the purposeful use of music during labor and delivery. And what we're going to ultimately get to in this section is talking about how we can put together a playlist so we can use that music to support rhythmic breathing. And most likely in Lamaze classes or other instruction or readings, you've looked into rhythmic breathing during labor. So we're going to first look at a definition here that is going to talk about the reason why we're using music the way we use it. And that is, it says entrainment. Now, that's not a typo. It's not supposed to say entertainment. It is the word what it says, entrainment. And let me give us a definition here. Entrainment is one thing time locking into another. And first let me talk about the origin, how it was discovered. In the 1700s, German scientists were working with grandfather clocks. Whatever they were looking for, they were working with many, many grandfather clocks, those big pieces of furniture with the pendulums. And after a day of work, they left the research area for the night, and they set all the clocks, and when they left, all the pendulums were swinging randomly. When they came back, to their amazement, they saw that all the pendulums were swinging together. That's entrainment. It's one thing time locking into another. Another example I'll talk about with regard to entrainment is that, let's say we take 8 people, and I say, okay, everybody, follow me. We're going to go to the smallest room in the building, and what I want to do is once we get in this very, very small, like a let's say a broom closet, we're stuffed in there. I say our task is, now that we're here, I want all of us from the waist up to bob back and forth. And probably we wouldn't have to bop heads more than one time to realize that the easiest way for us to get this job done using the least amount of energy is for all of us to go back and forth at the same time. That's entrainment. And nature and physics figures out. What does it figure out? It figures out how it can move the easiest using the least amount of energy. That's what entrainment is. An example of biological entrainment might be when women room together, let's say in a dormitory, how it's commonly talked about that all of their menstrual cycles could end up being at the same time. So that's biological entrainment. One thing time locking into another. And what does it have to do with music? Well, with regard to music, I've composed music like this, and I work in this manner. When I work with hospice patients, let's say I'm working with somebody who is in a declined state and they're really not responsive, but people still do benefit from music. 90% of our cognitive functioning is subconscious, so I never hesitate to work with individuals that are non-responsive. So what I'll do is I'll look at their breath rate as they're breathing slowly, and I'm a guitarist and I use my voice. I'll play music that goes right along with their breath rate. That's entrainment. I entrain myself to them. So, now what does this have to do with labor and delivery? Well, that's in the entrainment idea is what we want to do. We want to, just like you were probably instructed with rhythmic breathing in Lamaze, if you've done that, or what you've read, but now you're using music to coordinate your breathing. Early in the labor phase, when breathing is slower and you're more relaxed and it's not very intense yet, that's when you want to pull out your slow tempoed CD or playlist. If my clapping is the tempo of the music, and I'm just going to approximate here, we want to breathe right with as best we can, right with the tempo of the music. And it might even be slower than that. And similarly, as labor intensifies, in the middle part of our labor phase, we want to pull out our CD and playlist with the medium tempo music. And again, use it as our guide. Use the music as our breathing guide. And then also later on in the third phase, as the labor intensifies, breathing is quicker and more intense, then we want to pull out our fast CD and playlist. And that's how we want to use it as our guide. Just as if we're dancing, we want to do our best to stay right with the tempo of the music, with our breathing. And now I'd like to describe the tempos of the music. Now, slow music, or for those of us that can remember back to school band, the Italian term largo for slow, is 42 to 66 beats per minute. And that's literally, with a stopwatch or a metronome, 42, let's say, beats per minute. You can count that out. Now don't worry, I'm going to be sharing with us in a few minutes something that we can use to help us with these speeds of the songs to compile our CDs or playlists. And what we want to do with that slow CD or playlist is, during the early part of labor when we are more relaxed, not much intensity going on, use the slow songs on your CD or playlist and just relax and breathe with that slow music. Now the second speed, medium, the Italian term andante, is approximately 56 to 88 beats per minute. As labor intensifies, we want to start breathing quicker. We want to put on the medium tempo CD or playlist and breathe with that as our guide. The third tempo of music, fast, the Italian term is allegro, 84 to 144 beats per minute. And of course, as labor intensifies and we want to have a guide for our quicker breathing, we want to pull out our fast music CD or playlist. As I mentioned earlier, we can do this ourselves, put together our playlists to gauge the tempos of the songs. We can do that with a metronome or a stopwatch, but I want to share with you that on my website, musicfromthestart.com, I've put together an application or an app for our Apple products like iTouch and iPhone and iPads, or Android products. An app that has lists of different tempo songs of the most common styles of music. For instance, I'm going to have 90s popular music, 80s popular music, contemporary country, contemporary Christian, classical, all the different styles of music. But under each style, I'm going to have listed the most popular, well-known songs of those three tempos. So you can just look at the list and see then if you have any of those songs in your own CD collection, or if any of your friends or family do. Or you can even then put together your playlist by resorting to using iTunes or other MP3 services, or however else you've put together playlists or CDs for yourself. Well, I hope the application is a big help to you putting together your CDs and playlists with the different tempos. Now, your CDs and playlists, they don't have to be vast, because remember what we're getting at here. We're not doing this for entertainment. Let's say this is your first birth, and you know that your mother had long labors, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, my mother had a 12-hour labor. Does that mean I might have a 12-hour labor? And that means my slow or less intense stage might be 3 hours, and that means I have to get a CD or a playlist that's 3 hours long. How am I going to come up with so many songs? Remember, we're not doing this for entertainment. If you come up with 5 songs that repeat, 10 songs that repeat, iPods and CDs have a repeat function. You're not doing it for entertainment. You're doing it for that purposeful use of using that music as that timekeeper, of that positive diversion from looking at the time, positive diversion from pain, positive diversion from stressors, all those things. So if you've chosen this on your playlist, you like and love that music, it's going to be okay to listen to it again. So just put your repeat function on. It can be vast, but it doesn't have to be. You can have 5 songs or 55 songs on each of your categories, slow, medium, and fast. So know that it does not have to be vast. And I already mentioned about the phone app. So use the phone app for your benefit and getting together your playlists and your CDs. And remember, with the idea of entrainment, you're then using that music as that guide, that timekeeper. Next, we'll be going on to how do you purposefully use music during infancy when your children are young. Now, this next section at the bottom of the outline sheet, number 4, this is going to be our shortest time because we've talked about most, if not all, of this information. I'm just going to reiterate a thing or two. It says the purposeful use of music and voice during infancy. Now you don't have to be nervous about voice because you know what we're talking about. Now, A, again, referred to, here we are again, this will be the last time, I promise, referred to number 1 at the top, B1. One way to use your voice or music during infancy is preferred music and use it enough to build up that conditioned response. There, I've said it for the last time. And B, another consideration with your infant or your toddler. Remember we talked about how you can purposefully and thoughtfully use music when you're pregnant? Now it's time to pull out those lists of songs or storybooks that you've read or music you've listened to during bedtime, during mealtime, during cleanup time, during bath time, music. Pull all those out. Think of how powerful it can be when now you and your family pull out that music at bedtime with your infant and toddler that you used when you were pregnant, when your developing baby was experiencing the music you loved, or a mother's voice reading a story. And again, it's going to be part of them. It's going to be real powerful, the responses they have from that. An example I see all through the week when I work with my autistic preschoolers is I've written a song called Line Up. It goes, line up, I have to be quiet. And I always do that song at the end of my music therapy groups with them. And like clockwork, as soon as they hear the first note of my guitar, because they experience that song every day, as soon as they hear that, they pick their chairs up and start walking quietly and get in line for the door. That's just how powerful music is. But it's even more powerful when your infant has experienced that music or a mother's voice when they were developing in the womb. And I guarantee that your children will have those associations. For instance, when you play music at bedtime that you used when you were pregnant, when they're infants and toddlers, when they hear that music, they will, again, I guarantee that they will associate that music with going to bed time. And that's what we're talking about, the power of music and the powerful conditioned responses that music used in a regimented way can bring about. Well, I hope you benefited from the information shared today. Music therapy and the purposeful use of music from pregnancy through infancy. And I hope you can put to use some of the strategies we discussed from instilling those positive associations using music when we're pregnant, through using music listening, as we talked about, to support rhythmic breathing at different stages of labor, and music to be used as a positive diversion from pain and stress. Then also even utilizing music, again, that we've instilled early in pregnancy, but using it when our children are young, infants and toddlers, pulling out that music or storybooks with mom reading, and really looking at the special, wonderful reactions that our children can have from those positive experiences. Thank you for visiting musicfromthestart.com. If you have any questions about maybe some of the research, please email me at vol@bex.net. But also, too, share with me any information or experiences you have using some of these strategies. I'd be really happy, and it would be fun for me to hear some of your experiences. So thank you very much.